So I'm Anna,
And I'm Shae.
and we co-own Over the Moon Farm and Flowers, and we're based in Delaware County, Iowa. Before we get into the webinar, I'll just give a super quick overview of who we are and why we're leading this webinar today. Also, just to note, we do have our newborn hanging out with us, so please be patient if you hear baby crying. We're going to do our best to be multitasking. So, like I said, we're based in Delaware County, Iowa, and we've been in business since July of 2019. So we are still falling into that beginning farmer category of being in business and operating for less than 10 years. And we do seasonal cut flowers primarily through the CSA model through the summer months. And then we also raise a couple thousand meat chickens, around 250 turkeys, and we raise a couple hundred ducks every year. And we do farrow to finish pigs, and we sell everything direct to consumer. We also farm on a family farm where we are renting land currently. And that is just the quick context. We'll talk more about things as we go on. You want to talk about that?
Yeah. And we're just going to kind of talk about our experience with funding our newer business. One model that we have used is the CSA model. We started our business using that with our flower subscription. We started with the flowers because they were low input, high return crop, and doing the CSA model really helped cash flow our business in those early years. Also, there's grant funding, which is kind of it can be kind of intimidating to start writing grants, but overall it can be really fun and successful when you have success with those and gain experience doing that. There's cost share programs through PFI. You can do some more traditional options like the USDA loans and the USDA grants, like the value added producer grant. You can reach out to your bank. You can do farm specific banks. We ended up doing a lot of our lending through a community bank that's local to us. And that's been really great because they understand our community and our experience in the community, and they really work well with us. And it's nice to have a local option that you can just like drive up there and drop stuff off quick. And you can also we got an operating line of credit through that community bank.
Yeah, so in today's webinar, we're going to mostly talk about these two different options. So option one, which we're considering unconventional funding, is the CSA model and typically private grant funding. And we're calling those unconventional forms of funding because they do have typically different or less requirements than some of more traditional ways of accessing capital, like your bank loans. So it can be an easier option when you're starting out, or perhaps when you don't have like multiple years of financial data. And there's obviously personal preference involved with all of the different types of accessing capital. So Shae gave us a little bit of an overview of how we've used both conventional and unconventional funding to grow our business. And I will dive a little bit deeper, and then we're going to go through an example later in this Farminar. So Shae mentioned that we have utilized our bank as well as grants and CSA. And so I'll talk about why we started by utilizing just the CSA model to grow our business. And we actually utilized the community supported agriculture model for both flowers and for meat. And I'll just give an overview of what a CSA is for folks who might be new to that idea. CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture, and it's a model where you have customers essentially buy the product at the beginning of the season while you're putting your while you need the cash, right? So a common example is for vegetable farms. You would have CSA members buy a share of your vegetables in the winter or the early spring at the time where you're buying seeds. Maybe you're paying for labor to have people help start seeds and get ready on the farm. And then people get a share of the vegetables once a week or every other week all summer long. So we utilize that same model for flowers. People would buy in at the beginning of the season, and then they would get a bouquet every single week. We did a similar thing for meat. So people would buy in and they would get 3 months they would sign up to get a monthly meat box for 3 months in a row. And so both of those options are ways for your customers to essentially become the bank. It's a way that you don't have to necessarily utilize a more conventional option. And your customers then share in the risk versus you sharing in the risk with the bank. So we did that when we were starting out because it's a pretty common model, and for a lot of reasons, it can be awesome and really, really helpful. I will say, we'll go into this in a second too. Utilizing the CSA model is often primarily used to help you with cash flow, right? So it's helping you pay for seeds, it's helping you pay for labor as you go, versus giving you capital or giving you funding for like an infrastructure project. You might be able to do that with profit from your CSA, but that is where we have found the grants and cost share funding to be most effective. So in the last couple of years, I would say we have applied for nearly every grant that we have been eligible for, which, takes a lot of time and energy, and at times can feel like a part-time job. But grant funding is often, not always, used for infrastructure. So buying equipment to grow livestock, putting up a building, buying a freezer, et cetera, are all examples of things that we've done with grant funding. And there is just typically they are privately funded, and there's a range of requirements and rules that come with them. Some grants are a lot more flexible than others, and you learn that as you're applying for them. So as I was saying before, it's really helpful to determine what you actually need funding for when you're growing your farm, because everyone's needs are going to be a little bit different. So you want to understand, do you need capital for cash flow? So that's like, do you need capital to help you make your seed order? Or do you need the capital, to buy the chicks initially? Or do you need capital for infrastructure and equipment? So do you need capital because you need to buy a tractor in order to be able to cultivate or till the ground, or you need the walk-in freezer to be able to function? Probably the answer is both, but everyone's situation is different, and so it's important to be able to identify that, because that's going to help you figure out where you're going for your funding. It's also really helpful to understand the enterprise specific needs of your funding. So as Shae mentioned before, we started with flowers because they are a crop that is really high labor intensity, but they're low cash input compared to, let's say, hogs, which are can be a little bit lower at labor input, but are much higher cash input. They take a lot more money up front. So I'll just do you want me to just dive right into it? Okay, I'll keep going. So talking a little bit more about unconventional funding sources. Unconventional funding sources can also be, I've talked about the CSA model, but I'll talk a little bit about taking a deposit and a pre-order, because that's something that we've done a lot too, and can really depend on, what products you're selling. So for example, if you are selling whole hogs, you could take a pre-order or a deposit for them, which will help cover some of your upfront costs. So you could take $100 pre-order, a $200 pre-order on a whole hog that someone's going to eventually end up paying $500 for. And that will help with the cash flow of feed and other expenses that you have right away. Also, when you're talking about unconventional funding sources, there's often unconventional funding sources that are meant for specific groups of people. So whether that's young farmers or BIPOC or certain regions or different enterprises, like whether it's livestock or horticulture, food safety, there's often things that are more specific versus going to a bank or the USDA, where you might be entering into just a larger pool. I think especially too, when you're thinking about having a business such as ours, that's like diversified, unconventional, and might be less familiar to the bank or to FSA, depending on where you're at and who you're working with, it can feel a lot easier to access some of these unconventional funding sources that might be more familiar with a diversified model of agriculture.
And I think at least to start, that's how we've kind of naturally kind of had our flow, is that we started with a lot of the unconventional sourcing options. And then now, since we have more even just tax returns and whatnot, that we've been able to go with more traditional options.
Yeah, so now I would say that we're very, very much utilizing both options. So like we've been saying, unconventional funding sources work because you can start right away. There's a lot of options for unconventional funding sources, whether your business is 2 years old, 2 months old, or 20 years old. And it can be less restrictive, and some people do have a personal preference for going that route. I think it's also important to note when you're talking about unconventional funding sources, like a CSA model where you're kind of using your customers as a bank, or applying for grants, you're not needing collateral. When you're talking about a bank loan, besides often needing multiple years of tax returns and more financial data, you often need collateral to put up against your loan, and that can be a barrier, especially when you're getting started.
And I think too, it really depends on what your goals are for your business and what your production goals are, how much you want to make. I think that really depends on what options that you'll need to explore. Yeah.
Yes, totally. I think it's really important to know what your goals are and what you need to make work. And we'll talk about that as we go through our example. It's also important to note that unconventional funding sources like grant funding, like cost share programs through PFI, et cetera, can be a lot more flexible in the type of application they accept. We've seen many grant funding opportunities in the last couple of years who accept videos in addition to the written, or you don't have to have the written, you can just do a video, or there's different options and different support levels for those. And so that, again, can often really help with the accessibility of applying for financing through a grant opportunity.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways that you can find them too. I feel like it's something that in my free time, I find myself looking for grants online quite often. We've done a variety of the county specific and Iowa specific grants, which those are really, I think, beneficial because you just have a less of a pool of other competition for those applications and whatnot. Farm Raised is a good one. PFI, the listserv, which is a good one. If you aren't signed up for the email, sign up for the email. And then, like I said, a lot of Google searches, you can find a variety of grants that way. And you can also reach out. You don't have to just do farm specific grants. There's a variety of just small business grants or different grants for different groups of people. There's tons of different options out there.
Yeah, I think that's been really helpful for us, is not limiting ourselves to just looking at farm specific grants. I think we've primarily gotten farm specific grants, but we have applied for a variety of things that are just like women in business grants or small business options. And so I'm sure we will continue to do that as we look for access to capital, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, so now diving in a little bit to conventional funding sources. So once again, these are like semi-arbitrary categories, but when we talk about conventional funding sources, we're more specifically talking about bank loans or USDA loans where you just often need more financial data. So we're going to talk about operating lines of credit from a bank. You might hear them referred to as an operating note or an operating line. And I would say that operating lines are very common just within agriculture in general. So your banker, probably every bank in Iowa, is familiar with operating lines of credit for like a crop farm or a cattle farm or a hog farm. And operating lines of credit are specifically used for cash flow versus a loan that might be used to put up a building or for infrastructure needs. And so when you access an operating line of credit, you can kind of think about it as, instead of having a CSA where people sign up and give you the cash ahead of time, you're using your bank this time as the way to give you that operating capital that you need to fund an enterprise as it gets going. So when you do an operating line of credit, you need collateral for it. An example of collateral is a car, tractor, piece of equipment, or a blanket security agreement, which is like all of the above, thrown into one, that you're agreeing to the bank, obviously, that you will pay them back, or they will sell your assets, but that you will pay them back. And an operating line of credit can be really helpful if you are looking to scale up enterprises or have enterprises that are cash intensive upfront and that are potentially hard to use unconventional funding sources for. So again, I'm going to give an example as we go on about Thanksgiving turkeys, because they are something that we have utilized both unconventional and conventional funding sources for, and have learned a lot through that process. Also, I think it's important, as we're talking about conventional funding sources, to say that we're not giving financial advice. We are not giving legal advice. This is purely our experience of what we have learned as we've built our business and what we've best utilized.
I think it's also important to mention that we did receive a lot of help from other people before seeking the line of credit, just because we were really kind of unfamiliar with how that process was going to go. I think Anna was a lot more willing to even kind of seek that. And I think I was feeling early on pretty conservative about taking out that loan. But then once we finally did go through the process and work with the banker, I felt just such a sense of relief having that in that next following season. It felt really good to be able to keep more of our cash in the bank. And yeah, it felt really nice to have that as another kind of tool in our toolbox for our season.
Yeah, so with the operating line, what Shae was referencing in terms of support was we participated in PFI's Practical Farmers of Iowa, who's putting on this webinar. If you're new, we participated in PFI's both their savings and incentives program, which is an awesome opportunity to put some money in the bank and then it gets matched. So that's a great example of a way to build infrastructure. But also we participated in their advanced business coaching program, which was kind of a like SIP part 2. And we were able to work with Andy Larson, who does a lot of amazing financial support through the Food Finance Institute out of the University of Wisconsin. And he specifically supported us via many phone calls in terms of how to set up an operating line of credit with our bank. So we did not just know how to do it on our own. We asked a lot of questions and went back and forth with him a lot. And yeah,
I think it's also important to note too that explaining on our kind of unconventional farm business in our community was a little bit challenging, because our banker had never heard of anyone that was doing direct to consumer. So it did take some effort and some time to explain our business. And I don't want to say convince her, but it almost seemed like it felt like that a little bit, to convince her that it was like a viable business and what we were doing maybe a little bit different for our Delaware County region, but it was still something that we needed this kind of funding for, and that was helpful for us.
Yeah, and I think an example of that is when you operate a business that is potentially different and direct to consumer, and kind of depending on what your situation is, your collateral, your assets like look a lot different than if we were, for say, a crop farm and we just had a couple pieces of equipment. But it's much harder to collateralize things like chicken crates or chicken tractors, or sows that you like, a handful of sows for breeding stock and heritage breed sows. It just looks very, very different. And so it's just a different conversation, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so we're gonna dive into an example. Turkeys feel like one of the better examples on our farm of figuring out how to finance them. So turkeys require, I'm gonna use Thanksgiving turkeys specifically. So these are turkeys that are being raised for meat and to be sold around the holiday season, so in around November. So they require 4 to 5 months of cash flow. This is for a white turkey, which is what we raise, just typical meat breed of turkey. They require 4 to 5 months of cash flow. You have the cost of the poults, which is the freshly hatched turkey. You have your feed costs, you have your day-to-day labor, and then you have the cost to process them. Again, people have different inputs. We're using ours specifically, which is that we drive them to a USDA processor, they are frozen, and we take them back to our farm and we distribute them. So that's just the context. Again, your costs look different depending on what you're doing. For us, we would have roughly $50 of cash inputs per bird. So maybe if we're talking like 15, 20 birds, you might be able to swing that cash up front. But when you're talking about 200 or 250 or more, that's a lot of cash that's happening prior to the bird being sold. And we have you're raising those birds and you're doing the cash input a lot earlier than the typical customer even knows what they're doing for Thanksgiving. So let's say that we're getting turkeys in like May or June. It is very hard, not impossible, but it is hard to get people to put down a deposit on a turkey to help you with that cash flow when you are so many months out from them being able to have it for Thanksgiving. So what are your options in a situation like that? Of course, your first option is perhaps you have personal funding or revenue from a different enterprise to cover your upfront cost of raising your turkeys, and then you just assume that you're going to pay yourself back at the end of the season. You're going to hope, I would say, that you pay yourself back at the end of the season. And an example of that would be, when we were doing flowers and we started bringing other enterprises into the mix, the money kind of is all in one pool, and maybe you had a really good year with flowers and it's going to support in some of the cash flow for raising turkeys. Or maybe you have an off-farm job and you are just going to cover your costs with your personal financing. That's option one, but obviously that's not an option for everyone. And Shae and I both are full-time on the farm also. I think that's important context. It's not an option for everyone, and it does get a lot harder when you're talking about scale. Your second option is to ask your customers to share in the risk with you and to put down a deposit on a bird, depending on your financial need. The deposit could be like anywhere from $5 to $50. One year we did 25, and then we realized that we should just do 50 because that was the upfront cost of raising the bird. So that's more like doing the CSA kind of model where your customers are joining in that risk for you and you are doing the hustle of selling those birds while they are still running around the farm. And for us, that was a good option, I think, we did it
when we had smaller groups.
When we had smaller groups of turkeys, that felt like a really good option because it allowed us to have some of that cash up front to pay for their feed and to pay for the upfront cost of the bird, and is something that we have continued doing even with our other forms of funding. But it is a lot of pressure to have people put down a $50 deposit for their turkey in July when that turkey is still running around. For us raising pastured birds, there's a lot of risk involved, and so you are either asking your customers to share in the risk or you're taking on the personal responsibility that if something happens, what are you going to do? Are you going to refund everyone? Are you going to hope for the best? It really, that's kind of a personal preference, but it is something that has caused us a lot of stress.
Mm-hmm.
Option 3 is you work with your bank to set up an operating line of credit that can be used to pay your cash expenses for raising your turkeys, and then you pay your operating line off after selling your birds. Or option 4 is doing a combination of all the above, which option 4 is about where we've landed, which is that we use an operating line to pay the upfront costs of raising our turkeys, and then we pay that operating line off after. But we also do give people the option to put down a deposit on their turkey so that we can have some of that cash flow and perhaps minimize how much of our operating line we need to use for that enterprise. And we found that having a combination of things happening is helpful. And just in the same way that diversified agriculture can help minimize risk on your farm, having a diversity of funding methods can also help. On the turkey example also, I think this is a good example of utilizing grant funding and cost share program funding in order to build the infrastructure we've needed to scale up the birds. We've utilized Practical Farmers of Iowa's grazing cost share program, where we were able to purchase more electric netting and energizers that we raise our turkeys in. Through PFI's savings incentives program, we were able to co-invest, co-cost share to buy turkey transport crates, which are quite expensive and were a pretty big investment. And then we also had various grant funding supported us in the purchase of a walk-in freezer. That was a county-specific grant through Lynn County. We were able to get a walk-in freezer, which is very necessary for this quantity of turkeys. That's an infrastructure need. And also we, through a different grant, have worked on building a brooder for turkeys and a warehousing building for distribution. So there's a whole kind of slew of ways that we've pulled the financing together to be able to scale up turkeys to become quite a profitable enterprise in the fall and winter months. I'm going to talk through some helpful resources or.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about the Food Finance Institute through the University of Wisconsin. That's who we worked with Andy Larson a lot there. Anna mentioned the Savings Incentive Program a few times and the Advanced Business Coaching. We did some SCORE mentoring. I met with weirdly, it was a radio he owned a radio station. So it was kind of a unique mentoring opportunity, but it was kind of nice to have someone from outside of our kind of like scope to help and offer some different business coaching. We went through the Kirkwood Community College in our area. They have a small business development center, and we worked with a mentor there too. And she owned a coffee shop, which once again, she gave us like great insight though on just owning a business and what it looks like to have a business in Cedar Rapids that was really successful. And she owned a business for a lot of years. So it was really nice to have that as an option. Your local Chamber of Commerce could offer a lot of resources. You should definitely look into it. I know I've taken QuickBooks classes, and they have a lot of other resources online for small businesses. So it's definitely worth looking into your Chamber of Commerce. And then the FACTS Food Animal Concerns Trust, Anna has done the Humane Farm Mentorship Program there, and she was a mentor and a mentee. She's a mentor right now. And that has been hugely helpful with us. Do you want to talk about that some? You did that multiple times.
Yeah, it just can be really helpful to connect with someone who's potentially more experienced and to talk about business development side of things has been really helpful if that's a need that you had. And also FACT helped us. We did a financial boot camp through them, which was in combination with the Food Finance Institute. Which was super helpful. I would say that for us, from the beginning, we knew that finance and accounting and business growth was something that we would need to learn a lot about. And so that's why we kind of focused on finding programs that were specifically designed to help us figure out that part of our business. And yeah, that's a constant kind of learning.
Also, I feel like we constantly are listening to a variety of different podcasts about business growth and development, and also YouTube. I'm huge into YouTube. So yeah, definitely there's so many resources out there.
Yeah, so I think now we have a pretty good amount of time to do a Q&A period and see what people are wanting to chat about. We went through that pretty fast, so we can go back to anything.
That was a good Anna and Shae. There was a question, I think you might have inadvertently asked or answered it, because I didn't see it pop back up. But do you mind just describing, I think the exact names that you used for the PFI incentive programs and maybe that experience. I don't know if they had that question answered or not. The PFI, the name of the incentive program that you used.
Savings incentive program.
And that's, okay, yeah.
Yep, SIP.
Yeah, SIP is
Okay.
what.
Yep. And then we've done the grazing cost share and then the advanced business coaching. And then we've also attended various beginning farmer retreats. I just presented at one on Saturday. So yeah, we've tried to utilize all of the different PFI resources that exist, conference programming. And
if you have a question for either Shae or Anna, you can type them in the chat box below. If you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll see a little chat box more towards the left-hand side, and you're able to type in any questions you have in there. I'll give everyone a few moments. All right. About how much time a week do you spend searching for funding opportunities?
It depends on the season. You know, I think definitely during the late fall and winter months, we spend, you know, I find myself personally just doing it kind of in like moments where I'm like maybe waiting at the doctor's office or something, you know, like just in small moments here and there. Like, I wouldn't say we sit down too often, like just very strategically to look at least at like grants and stuff. But what do you think?
yeah, I think that's
Yeah, it's
That's
just in
accurate.
casual moments, I feel like I will scroll it, or just when I think about it, like if something, you know, pops up, I'll just like see what's coming up due soon, you know.
Okay. This is for either one of you. Have you used CSP with the U.S. Department of Agriculture?
we have not.
Okay.
I see these two. Oh.
How many years did you do CSA before you started to scale up? And were you able to live on that, or did you have farm jobs?
Yeah, so we still do CSA too, also. Like we're still doing a combination of both things, and we think that that's we like having a combination of options. And we started our business in 2019. We did our first year of the CSA model in 2020, which we know was a weird year. And at that point, we still were doing like part-time other jobs in addition to the farm. And I would say that continued 2020, and in 2021, we were more full-time. I don't think I was working at that point. Yeah, so we were able to focus more on just our farm by 2021.
Okay. All right. Sorry. Which on your farm particularly, which enterprise is your favorite?
I think for both of us, just raising livestock in general, like I really enjoy the poultry. I like poultry. I like that they're easy for me to be able to like do all of the management myself. If there's, you know, if there's an issue with a hog, it requires maybe some extra help. So I like being able to do the poultry, just me if I need to. So that's my favorite is the poultry.
Yeah, and I really like farrowing our pigs.
Mhm.
Yeah, lots of good learning there.
Yeah, livestock is our passion project and kind of it's just like our livelihood and it's everything. You know, we really love raising livestock.
Thank you. Prior to this, did you have any grant writing experience before writing the ones that you did? And did you get any help writing, outside help writing the grants?
Yeah.
We didn't have grant writing experience. I did a lot of scholarships in high school. That was kind of the closest thing to grant writing that I had done. And then you hadn't had any.
Yeah, I didn't have any grant writing specific experience, but had worked for nonprofits prior to farming. So I think there was some like writing experience overlap. And I think, you know, it is important to note that like both of us have college degrees that required a lot
A
of
lot of
writing.
yeah.
Shay did women's studies and I did agriculture and political science. And so I do think we had a pretty high level of like writing experience prior to writing grant applications. But over the last couple of years, like we have seen ourselves like improve a lot, just like having the experience doing it. And like we said, like we do think it's really important and really awesome that there is grants that are open that require different things. And you don't have to be like a professional writer to be able to apply for them. So we think that's really great having those different types of options.
I also think it's important not to get discouraged if you just write one and you don't get it and you're just like, well, I'm not good at this. I just won't do this anymore. It's definitely worth trying again and kind of just working at it. It's a skill kind of that you have to work, practice and work on.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's important to really follow the instructions, like really really read things over and really, really follow things to make sure that you're not like disqualified for some reason.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Kind of following up on that previous question, have more grant, I guess, maybe opportunities or applications opened up to you once you had some of that traceable financial data to show your farm income?
Mhm.
Yes.
I think it just made our application stronger to be able to write about kind of the our financial situation too.
Yeah, and I was gonna say like we're in the process of applying for the USDA's value added grant, and that is one that does require a fair amount of financial data and business planning and marketing data. And so I think we feel at least like, I don't know if we'll get it, but like we feel able to apply for that at this point versus a few years ago. I don't feel like we had the data or skills to apply for a grant of like that magnitude. Yeah.
I'm going to go just a little bit out of order here since the next question kind of follows off the last two. Is there a typical range of approved grant applications? Is it, for example, 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20?
Huge range.
Huge range, yeah. Huge range. And yeah, I don't even know that we would know how many people apply for a lot of them.
Yeah, big range. And like, I think it really looks different. Like, if you're applying again for like something that might be like county or Iowa specific versus like a national grant. Like, this past year we did the National Young Farmers Grant that we had applied for that grant every
For
year.
years,
I
yeah.
think we applied for it every year since 2019 and we got it in 2023. And that had like quite a large pool of people because it was like because it was a national grant versus some of the meant the number of applications you send in. Oh yeah. It depends. Like I said, like we
have done a lot of like short ones that were national, that were like women in business that we never.
We haven't
it's
gotten.
hard. No.
Yeah. But once you've written some grants, you can often reuse the materials.
Yeah.
So I would not say that for every grant we're spending a new 10 hours on it.
Yeah.
So there's like opportunities to not rewrite the wheel. Obviously it can depend on what you're applying for, but I will say the more you do, the more you can go back and say, okay, like I now have a pretty solid like about me written or description of our business, or I have paragraphs on our financial data, and like I can now copy and paste that into a different application. And so it does get a lot faster and more accessible to apply for things once you've done a substantial amount of them. And it's not like we've done hundreds. Like I would, we don't have hundreds of hundreds. I'd say just generally we've done probably like 20 or so, but then you end up having a lot to look back on.
All right. I'm going to jump topics here a little bit and kind of go back up to Ben's question. What is your birds per acre ratio in your poultry operation? And are you utilizing free range birds with a fixed house, or is it a mobile poultry tractor?
Yeah, we do the electric netting, the fence, and then we use a lot of truck toppers and whatnot. We don't have a fixed house, and we don't use like the Joel Salatin style, like chicken tractor or anything like that. We do all of the netting. And then, yeah, like at this juncture, we used a lot of truck toppers. We got them at an auction for like a couple bucks and they worked really well for us.
Yeah, we really,
And-
oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, you can.
Oh, I was gonna say, like, just on the poultry front, through some different mentoring programs and whatnot, we've tried to build that enterprise with as little like capital input as possible, in order to have like maximum profitability, while also having like what we think is a really high quality of life for our birds. And it has worked in our situation. We have some guard geese to help with aerial predators, which we typically only have a problem with like at the height of bald eagle season. But there is quite a few things. Our geese do actually help with that. But we've been able to raise a lot more birds and without hugely without investing
Spending
in
much money,
yeah,
yeah.
a lot because we haven't built like big chicken tractors. And that's also worked for the land that we're utilizing, I would say. And could I tell you the exact ratio? I couldn't tell you off the top of my
No.
head. And it has looked different for turkeys and chickens and ducks, and it's depended on the forage we've had and just like a lot of different things. So off the top of my head, I can't answer that, but we are happy to talk more about it. Feel free to send us an email or message or whatever.
Thank you. What was your method for figuring out inputs and outputs when you first started? I'm not sure if this is related to your turkeys or just in general. And what kind of losses did you have when you were starting?
Good question. If I could go back and tell ourselves one thing, it would definitely be to understand our input costs more from the very beginning. I think it's something we've gotten way better at, but especially in terms of your like labor inputs, it's really easy to like act like labor is free. And that is, it's not true. So I can't remember which program this was, but we were given the advice to like always calculate the cost of replacement labor into your enterprises. So like if you couldn't work tomorrow, like what would it cost to hire someone to do that job instead? And so that's something we've gotten like way better at. Like for the example of like the turkeys with the $50 of cash input, like that includes our labor. So that if we had to pay someone to do our turkey labor, like it's at least calculated in our price. And so, yeah, that's, I feel like really important. And I would say that, let's see, what kind of losses, do you mean? I guess I'm not sure how to answer what kind of losses, like financial losses, like losses of, yeah, I guess if you wanted to further clarify what kind of losses, we could answer that. Like if you plant, oh, okay.
Oh, geez. It depends where we put them, the weather. It's been so, or if the rabbits, we have a big rabbit problem. My dad feeds the rabbits, so
Yeah,
we have a huge rabbit population. So it is just, we've had some things that we've had total loss on for sure. We've had
yeah.
a range, but usually things turn out pretty good, like sunflowers or whatnot.
Yeah, and I think that it is hard to calculate for your loss, but we always try to, regardless of kind of what we're thinking about, whether it's flowers or for animals. For flowers, the plus side is usually one, because flower seeds are typically not very expensive, especially when you buy them in the wholesale quantity. And because you can grow so many of them in a very small space. We typically plant enough always so that we know that even if we have a total catastrophic loss of something, something else still exists. And I will say, especially on the horticulture front, having relationships with other people who are growing flowers or vegetables or whatnot is super, super helpful. Because we have over the years developed pretty strong relationships with other people within like an hour radius of us who are growing flowers, so that if you have a problem, there's usually someone to turn to, so you can still fulfill like the needs of your CSA. And I know people do that with other crops as well. I think just as a rule of thumb, I think for projecting outcomes, like I think you usually can anticipate you're going to have like at least 30% loss. just like with germination and whatnot, but that really varies. Oops, I can't hear you. I think you're muted.
Yep, I'm gonna jump back up here real
Oh.
quick. How many acres does your farm have? And is there a lot of it that's, I suppose, tillable?
So we're farming on about 10 acres in general, of rented space, and we're only we're growing flowers on a very small amount.
Very, yeah.
Very small, like.
At this juncture, yeah, it's
It's-
mainly for poultry.
Yeah, mainly for poultry. The flowers are like maybe a half an acre, less than half an acre, a quarter of an acre,
Yeah.
of ground that's being tilled.
All right, thank you. We have a few more minutes, unless we finish early, but there is still time if you have a question for either Anna or Shae. Go ahead and type it into the chat box below, and I'll give everyone a moment. I'm gonna go make sure I didn't miss one. Oh, here's one. Do you have to worry about crop rotation with the flowers, and do you rotate acres or the same acres under production each year?
We've done a little bit of both, I
Yeah,
would say, but usually it's the same kind of areas that we're replanting.
with flowers, yeah. Yeah, we do rotate the like types of flowers, like, you know, we don't do our like tulips in the same spots every year. And same with some of the like more heavy feeders. And we do let the poultry do all of our cleanup on the flower field, so that has also like definitely helped with fertilizer.
And just the
Cleanup.
yeah, if
Um,
there's disease plant material or whatever.
But yeah, and I would say that we're not like growing enough flowers, at least at this juncture, and probably won't in the future, to feel that concerned about disease pressure and whatnot, but that could change. Oh, how far?
Do you use any farmer market venues for your flowers?
So we have participated in both the Cedar Rapids Downtown Farmers Market as well as the Iowa City Farmers Market. I will say that neither have been large parts of our revenue streams. We've used them kind of as marketing and yeah, but I would say the CSA has been the bulk of our revenue stream for flowers specifically.
All right, and with that in mind, how far in advance do you start planning your next scale up of an enterprise? With that, how do you know that you're ready to scale and by how much?
Good questions.
I feel like it's something that we talk about like all the time. It's something that like even I know when we did some of our business financial planning and whatnot, we have been talking about like what it will look like for us in 5-10 years, because at this juncture, we both are younger and the physical work feels like we're able to do it at this juncture, but that might not always feel like that. So I think we have had always kind of talked about what it's going to look like. And I think just that our business started during kind of that pandemic time, we had started and we knew that we had to have like a plan A, plan B, plan C, plan D, plan E. Like you have to have just so many different options and be willing to adapt to the seasons and how the market's going. And it's just something that we're always talking about, I feel like. Because
Yeah.
well, you can go ahead
I know.
do some.
Yeah. I think it's important to like know what your like financial needs are.
Yeah.
I think that helps you figure out what to scale and how much,
Mhm.
because it depends, like, are you trying to with your enterprise or with your like farm business in general, like, are you paying all your bills with it? Are you paying just, you know, are you trying to pay just some of your bills with it? Do you need an employee? Do you want an employee? Do you need to cover that cost? What does that look like for you? And then to work backwards from there. Like, you know, I think on the turkeys, for example, like Shae and I know at this point, like we know a pretty good number that we need to make in terms of profit in order to have the turkeys give us enough profitability to survive the winter, for us to, you know, pay the bills in like November, December, etc. And so that helps dictate like how many we're gonna raise. And like even with the flower CSA, like we know just about like how many we aim to sell, and kind of what the profitability is there on that, just in terms of what our needs are. So I think kind of working backwards has been helpful. And then in terms of knowing when to scale, that's a hard question. Cause again, like I think some of it is like financial, what kind of financial needs and pressure do you have? Like, do you need to scale? Do you want to scale? What are the, you know, kind of the pros and cons of each?
You know, and too, this is something that we talk about a lot, but with like, at this juncture, we're not really growing our flower enterprise. And sometimes we have questions about that, but it's a lot to do with the labor. And we kind of have maxed out what we can do with just our labor. We don't have any other outside employees, and we don't want that for a variety of reasons at this time, at least. Like maybe in the future, that will be a different discussion. But at this juncture, I think we feel pretty comfortable just having our business be something that just requires our labor for most of the activities that we do. Like we do need some help loading hogs and stuff sometimes, but other than that, like we do everything ourselves. So yeah, I think it just has a lot to do with like what our goals are.
Yeah.
And what, you know, I feel like we've been kind of conservative with certain things that we've grown with. We've been a little bit slower to try things out. And then other things we have just really kind of, we're diving in, we're doing this many chickens this year. That's what we're going to do. And we're going to figure it out. And so far it's worked pretty well. We've done pretty well with it. Like, I don't know if it's because we've gotten lucky or if
I don't think it's.
I think it's a variety of reasons. I think we have done a lot of planning and whatnot, and Anna does a ton of marketing, and we're always kind of trying to grow and grow clients and grow a customer base and try new things, even with our online sales platforms and different things. So.
Great. Well, thank you. We are at time, or about time here. So I'd like to thank Anna and Shae, and thank everyone for joining us today. As you sign out, please remember that there is an evaluation, and we would love it if you take a moment to fill that out for us. And thank you.